If you're feeling bogged down by the impossible expectations or the noise of new year, new me, take a second to pause. Grow Therapy gives you space to slow down, check in, and start the new year from a more grounded place. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 50th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions, nights and weekends. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans, including Medicaid in some states. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/booknow today to get started. That's growtherapy.com/booknow. growtherapy.com/booknow. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
Welcome to True Crime Garage, one of America's top true crime podcasts. I am one of the hosts, Nick, and each week here in the garage, we take on a new case, a new true crime story. We specialize in cold case investigations, but also feature missing persons cases, mysteries ripped from the headlines, and unsolved homicides. True Crime Garage has been at the top of the true crime podcast charts on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music for years now. And we are also available on the SiriusXM listening app. If you like and love great podcasts like Missing Persons, Criminology, and Below the Surface, well, then you belong in the garage. Go to truecrimegarage.com for more. Or click on your favorite listening app and start listening today to True Crime Garage.
You're listening to Below the Surface, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Campus Killings, and Killer Communications. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
A missing person, a strange death, a vanished vehicle, a series of unanswerable questions. In so many true crime mysteries, the answers remain elusive. But in many instances, the clues lead right to the water's edge, and sometimes the truth lies below the surface. Hi listeners, I'd like to welcome you to our inaugural episode of Below the Surface. I'm your host, Olivia. Please allow me to give a brief introduction before we get started with our first case. As you can probably guess from my accent, I am from Australia, and I currently co-host the podcast True Crime Society with my friend Stephanie. In our podcast, we discuss all things true crime, current cases, cold cases, missing persons cases. We often take suggestions from our listeners. We have over 250 episodes of True Crime Society available to binge on now, and I hope our listeners will check it out. We also have an active social media presence in which we interact with over 500,000 followers, discussing all things true crime. We provide daily updates on our Instagram stories. We love to hear your thoughts on the current cases and any other ideas for cold cases that you'd like us to cover. So that's enough about me. Now I'd like to tell you what you're in store for in each episode of Below the Surface. In every episode, we'll be discussing fascinating cases that have one common theme: water. Some of the cases we'll discuss are solved and others remain mysteriously or hopelessly unsolved. In some episodes, you may recognize the case that we're talking about, and in others, they may be ones that you haven't heard of. I'll do my best to provide all the details you need to get a complete understanding of the story. New episodes of Below the Surface will air every other Saturday, and they'll often be on the shorter side, 30 minutes or less, so you can listen to the episode and then move on with your day or deep dive for more information. One thing you never need to worry about is endless banter. We'll always jump right into the case. So with that in mind, please let me have just one more moment of your time before we get started. We'd love for you to follow us on social media. We're on every major platform, so search for us on your favorites, and we'll be sure to include links in the show notes. You can also find us on our website, belowthesurfacepodcast.net. Finally, we'd very much appreciate you leaving a rating or review on the platform you're listening to us now on. This will really help us grow and it helps new listeners to find the show. And please tell your friends about Below the Surface. Nothing beats word of mouth. Thank you all so much. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get started with today's case. Today I'll be unpacking the case of journalist Kim Wall. Best known for her articles in The Guardian, The New York Times and Vice, the journalist disappeared in a submarine beneath the Oresund Strait after interviewing inventor Peter Madsen on August 10, 2017. We can only speculate what exactly happened below the surface, but upon the submarine's resurface, Kim was missing and Peter Madsen was not. Let's dive in. Born in 1987, Kim Wall grew up with her parents and her older brother Tom in the tiny town of Trelleborg in the south of Sweden. Her parents Ingrid and Joachim were both journalists, Ingrid in finance and economics and Joachim in photography. Their children's lives were filled with newspapers every morning as the family ate breakfast. Kim often accompanied her mother to interviews and assignments as a child, so nobody in the family was surprised when Kim announced that she wanted to be a journalist someday too. But not the kind that her parents were. She wanted to go places and write stories about the people nobody else bothered to pose questions to. As a teenager, Kim's family and friends described her as extremely driven and very impressive. Nothing stopped her, and even after she met her goals, she simply moved on to new ones. She never took time to sit on her laurels. After high school, Kim studied at the London School of Economics before getting her master's from the prestigious School of Journalism at Columbia University, where she graduated with honours at the top of her class. In the years after Kim obtained her master's, finding work with a particular network or company proved almost impossible, as most reporting networks were no longer hiring full-time journalists. Instead, these companies searched for freelancers who had already written articles and paid them for their rights to publish their stories. While this wasn't the most financially stable life, it worked for Kim. She went on to freelance for some of the world's most popular media outlets, including Vice, The Guardian, The New York Times, and even the South China Morning Post. One of her friends later told the BBC what made her journalistic abilities so exceptional was that she looked for quirky stories but with a bigger narrative. Most of the stories Kim focused on circled around subcultures, gender, and issues in social justice. While her interests were vast and she travelled frequently and wrote about her experiences in other countries, her stories were always incredibly topical and allowed her audience to see a deeper message beyond the reporting. She was particularly skilled at digging deeply into her interviews, and she never lost the humanity of her subjects. The more she wrote, the more she travelled. By the age of 30, Kim had literally traversed the globe, interviewing everyone from voodoo priests in Haiti to individuals identifying as vampires and gang members of China's Tamil Tigers. She was quick-witted, street-smart, and always prepared. Her friend Katerina recalled Kim explaining that she carried a photo of her and her parents in her wallet when she travelled. This wasn't because of any kind of emotional connection, but as a security measure in case she got kidnapped. Katerina explained that's just who Kim was. She was never afraid, always aware, and never reckless. She'd interview anyone, but was always able to keep charge of the situation with her Swedish bluntness and her carefully placed decisions. It's how she got reclusive and shy people to talk to her. It was also how she'd won a fellowship with the International Women's Media Foundation to report on Uganda and Sri Lanka. She'd also landed a commission to write a feature article for Harper's Magazine. But the world was not enough for Kim. There was always another story to be told. So in 2017, when she walked past a warehouse in Copenhagen belonging to the Rocket Madsen Science Lab, she saw a potential story. Kim had no idea that this would be the last story she would ever tell. In August of 2017, Kim and her partner, Danish designer Ulla Støby, were packing up their apartment to move to Beijing in China. After almost a decade of travelling the world and living in places for less than 3 months, Kim and Ulla had decided to settle permanently in Beijing to build a life together. But as they walked through their Danish neighbourhood a few months before their departure date, Kim noticed a warehouse that had escaped her previous notice. On the side of the building, Rocket Madsen's Space Lab was painted in large letters. Some cursory research informed her that RMS Labs, as it was more commonly known, was a company for do-it-yourself rocket and submarine projects. Its founder, Peter Madsen, who was often referred to as the Danish Elon Musk, was kind of a celebrity in Denmark. He was a self-proclaimed inventrepreneur who focused his engineering skills on ocean exploration and space travel. In 2008, he made headlines by inventing and building his own submarine called the UC-3 Nautilus. Peter was very keen on public interviews surrounding his inventions, especially after going on to partner with former NASA contractor Christian von Bengtson. Together they formed Copenhagen Suborbitals, which they described as a collective of amateur rocket makers funded by donations and working with the aim of launching a manned rocket into space. Despite the co-op dismantling in 2014 due to disagreements between Madsen and his fellow engineers, Madsen went on to create his own company, RMS Labs. Kim was enamoured with Madsen's story. His world was so removed from that of most people, getting his take on submarines and rockets was exactly the kind of article Kim would be able to pitch to a media outlet. But for all that Peter Madsen liked the press, he was a difficult man to get an exclusive interview from. It took Kim several months before she was able to schedule an interview with Peter, but on August 10, 2017, only a few days before she was due to leave Copenhagen for good, Madsen finally agreed to not only give her an interview, but a ride on his famous submarine. Kim was ecstatic to get such an opportunity, and Ulla walked her down to the dockyard at around 7 p.m. She shook hands with Madsen and boarded the Nautilus. Ulla snapped a photo of Kim waving from the top deck, and then he went home to get ready for the going-away party that the couple were throwing to say goodbye to their Danish friends. Kim's interview was only supposed to take around 2 hours, and then she said she'd join Ulla at the party. By the time Ulla returned to their apartment, Kim had texted him, "I'm still alive, by the way, but I'm going down now. I love you." He, as she meant Peter Madsen, bought coffee and cookies, though. Ulla texted her back and went to prepare for the party. By the 2-hour mark, Ulla expected to hear that Kim was coming home, but his phone remained silent. He texted her for an update, and he got no response. By midnight, Kim hadn't returned, and Ulla and their party guests were getting increasingly worried that something had gone wrong with the submarine. When there had been no word from Kim by 1:45 a.m., Ulla contacted the police to report Kim missing. Authorities and harbour staff were contacted to locate the Nautilus, but since the sub had no satellite tracking, nobody could get in contact with Madsen to find out if something had gone wrong. Local police and the harbour staff watched the water all night for any sign of the submarine, but the waters remained empty. At least until 10:30 a.m. the next morning, the Drowden Lighthouse off Koha Bay reported that the Nautilus had been spotted. Something was definitely wrong with it, though. As rescue helicopters tried to get in contact, as the sub resurfaced, Peter Madsen blew through the top hatch, waving frantically at nearby fishing boats. 4 fishermen were able to pull Madsen to safety, but he was alone. There was no sign of Kim Wall. The fishermen sailed Madsen into Drow Port, where both police and the media were waiting for him. Madsen was immediately arrested for Kim's disappearance, and the Nautilus was resurfaced and searched by investigators. They were hoping against hope that Kim was still on board somewhere, but the sub was empty. There was nobody else on board. Only Madsen knew the truth about Kim. Could they get him to tell it? In his initial interview, Madsen denied being with Kim at all, but later evidence showed that she had in fact boarded the Nautilus with him on August 10, so he quickly changed his story. He first claimed that after their 2-hour interview, he'd surfaced the sub and dropped Kim up on land, so he didn't know where she'd gone after that. But CCTV footage of the surrounding harbour showed this to be untrue. There were no signs of the Nautilus resurfacing. So Madsen switched gears. He said that the submarine's heavy hatch door had fallen on Kim's head as she descended into the submarine. And when he discovered that she had died, he claimed that he panicked and buried her at sea in the bay. Police and the local community mobilised to try and find Kim's body. It took 11 long and stressful days, but on August 21st, a cyclist found a female torso washed up on Clayensoan Beach. Metal pipe had been wrapped around the torso, presumably in an effort to keep it from floating to the surface. A later autopsy confirmed that the torso did belong to Kim Wall and that she had been stabbed 15 times, with most punctures centralised to the groin region. The report also stated that her limbs and her head were not missing due to accident, decomposition, or marine life feeding. They had all been deliberately cut off. Madsen's claim of Kim having had a terrible accident was a lie. He had murdered her, dismembered her, wrapped her body parts in metal piping and tossed them into the sea like fish food. But to truly prove this, investigators needed the rest of Kim's body. They surmised that Madsen had most likely dumped her somewhere on the border of Sweden and Denmark in the Oresund Strait. Both Swedish and Danish investigators worked together for several months, along with specialised cadaver dogs, to search the beaches. On October 6, 2017, almost 2 months after Kim's disappearance, a dog finally picked up a scent along the edge of the bay. Divers went down and found 2 plastic bags that had been weighted with cut pieces of metal piping. When opened, the bags revealed Kim's head and legs, a knife, and all the clothing that Kim had last been seen wearing. The autopsy showed no signs of blunt trauma to her head, further proving that Madsen had lied to police. A week later, divers discovered a handsaw that they sent out for forensic testing. By October 30, after being confronted with all this evidence, Peter Madsen changed his story for a 3rd time. This time he claimed that while he was on the submarine's deck, Kim had been exploring the engine room for some information for her article. There was a sudden issue and the air pressure on board plummeted, filling the engine room with noxious carbon monoxide fumes. Madsen said by the time he realised what had happened, he alleged that Kim had become trapped in the fumes, and when he opened the door, she was dead on the floor. When investigators asked, though, why he'd dismembered her, he responded that he couldn't get her out through the sub's hatch. He said he tried for over an hour and that she did not fit, so he had no choice but to cut her up and bury her at sea. About a month after this interview, Kim's arms were located, washed up in different areas of the bay. With the entire body assembled, pathologists concluded that Kim was murdered, dismembered and discarded all on the same night, August 10, 2017. Her lungs showed no signs of poisoning by carbon monoxide or anything else. There was no way that she died from any accident. Coupled with the autopsy, forensics also concluded that the knife found with her head and legs matched the wounds on her torso and that the handsaw matched the cut marks on her limbs. DNA testing also found Kim's blood on the military-style bodysuit Madsen was wearing when he'd been rescued on August 11. In addition, while Madsen claimed the Nautilus had sunk due to a broken ballast tank, investigations revealed that the sinking of the submarine was allegedly a consequence of a deliberate act. On January 18, 2018, Peter Madsen was officially charged with the murder of Kim Wall, along with sexual assault and indecent handling of a corpse. His trial began on March 8 at the Copenhagen courthouse. The prosecution laid out the forensic evidence and autopsy results, along with a disturbing array of discoveries found on Madsen's computer and cell phone. Evidence found on Madsen's work computer showed that he frequently watched videos of women being tortured and murdered. His iPhone memory recorded that he'd watched a video of a woman being beheaded only minutes before Kim arrived on the submarine. Calls and messages on his cell phone also showed that he'd invited several women to come out for a tour of the Nautilus the week before he'd invited Kim, and none of them had said yes. After nobody else had agreed to come, he'd finally called Kim about her interview. Witnesses also claimed that Madsen enjoyed asphyxiation sex. And while the prosecution could not definitively say exactly how Madsen had killed Kim, it was clear that he had, and he had planned it. He had been seen bringing a screwdriver, a handsaw and metal piping onto the Nautilus a few days before Kim's arrival. None of these tools were necessary to maintain or fix the submarine. The prosecution posed that Madsen lured Kim to the Nautilus with the promise of an interview, and once on board where she couldn't escape him, he sexually assaulted, tortured and killed her. He then sawed her body apart and tossed her out of the hatch to get rid of any evidence. Throughout the trial, Madsen's defence team rebutted that there was no physical evidence tying their client to the murder. They stuck to the story that Madsen had told police in October. Kim died of carbon monoxide poisoning and that he hadn't been able to fit her body out of the hatch, so he had to dismember her body. And while an expert for the defence did say that poisoning from exhaust fumes was possible, the temperature on board would have had to have risen exponentially, and there was no evidence that that had happened. On April 25th, Madsen was convicted of murder, aggravated sexual assault, and the indecent handling of a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison. In September of 2018, Madsen tried to appeal his life sentence. He was denied, with judges citing that his case was one of unusual brutality. Peter Madsen's jail time was also fraught, and only a few months into his sentence, he was hospitalised after he was attacked by another inmate. And though he maintained his innocence in the killing Kim throughout his trial, he allegedly confessed during 20 hours of interviews with a Danish journalist. Madsen apparently didn't realise that these interviews were being recorded, and when the journalist bluntly asked Madsen if he had killed Kim, he said, "There is only one who is guilty, and that is me." This was the first time Madsen had admitted the truth. Up until this interview, he'd maintained that while he had dismembered Kim, he had not killed her, and that she had died by an accident. But in 2020, Madsen gave permission for his recorded confession to be used in a mini docu-series titled Secret Recordings with Peter Madsen. He also gave permission for it to be used in the Discovery Plus documentary titled The Submarine Killer: Confessions of a Murderer. Some of the last public news about Madsen was reported that he tried to escape on October 20, 2020. He was apprehended only 500 yards away from the prison. Today he is incarcerated, and he will continue to be until the day he dies. Kim Wall's murder devastated her family and her friends. The abhorrent details of her murder were fodder for the media, and her family had to endure months of journalists contacting them, wanting information and wanting to tell Kim's true story. After several of these calls, Ingrid and Joachim decided that they would be the ones to tell Kim's story. Over the course of the investigation and the trial, Kim's parents wrote a memoir juxtaposing Kim's adventurous life and joyful childhood memories with the brutal and raw emotion of dealing with her murder. The book, titled A Silenced Voice, The Life of Journalist Kim Wall, became their coping mechanism for handling their crushing grief. But a larger part of it was to make sure that Kim's life and legacy weren't lost in her victimisation by the hands of Peter Madsen. By the end of 2017, over 60,000 articles had been written about her murder, but in Ingrid's opinion, Kim is nowhere. She's only called the victim, and it wasn't how her parents wanted her to be remembered. We'll have a link to the memoir in our show notes for anyone who'd like to check it out. In 2020, Ingrid and Joachim worked as consultants on a TV miniseries about Kim's murder called The Investigation. Their goal was to make sure that the show did not centre on Madsen and instead followed the police and volunteers who helped search for Kim's remains. Ingrid cited that working on the miniseries was another way to survive and make something good out of what had happened. To further the good, Kim's parents also created the Kim Wall Memorial Fund, which raises money to send future female journalists into the field to find their stories. Ingrid explained that Kim can no longer travel the globe to tell the stories of the unheard, but it gives them hope to know that they can send out the next generation in Kim's spirit. Kim was also posthumously nominated for Prix Europa's Outstanding Achievement Award for Journalist of the Year in October 2017. But Kim's fellow journalist and friend Katarina stated it best in her op-ed for The Guardian. She said, "What happened to Kim is not the screenplay for a Swedish noir, contrary to how the media presented it, and it must never ever be used to blame a woman for reporting on her own or to say that women aren't able to do this job. Every independent journalist I know would have put himself or herself in that situation, pre-reporting what sounded like an extremely quirky, complex and challenging story. The story of a Danish man who had started building rockets as a teenager and invented the largest private submarine." The worst part for Katarina was not only losing one of her best friends, but knowing that Kim would have written a fair and beautiful portrait of an unusual character. But instead, Madsen killed her. We will never know the stories that Kim would have gone on to tell. Her final story, and one sadly not written by her, is confined below the surface in the Oresund Strait. To learn more about Kim and her legacy, we invite listeners to check out the Kim Wall Memorial Fund, which we have linked in our show notes. I hope you've enjoyed the first episode of Below the Surface, and I'm excited to let you know that episode 2 is out and available to listen to right now. We'd love for you to follow us on social media. We're on every major platform, so search for us on your favourites, and we'll be sure to include links in the show notes. You can also find us on our website, belowthesurfacepodcast.net. If you'd like to show your support for this show and get your episodes early and ad-free, consider an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, not only will you get early and ad-free access to this show, but to every show on the AbJack network of shows. To get started, just head over to Apple Podcasts and search for the AbJack Entertainment channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Finally, we'd very much appreciate you leaving a rating or review on the platform you're listening to us now on. This will really help us grow and it helps new listeners to find the show. And please tell your friends about Below the Surface. Nothing beats word of mouth. Thank you all so much.
Below the Surface is hosted and narrated by Olivia McKenzie, with research and writing by Abagail Belcastro, and it's produced by Mike Morford for AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to join us for the next episode of Below the Surface.